Hello Internet, long time no see. It's video time again, and it's a very simple one this month. As you've probably just seen, the example there, we're going to make a dodging game, similar to Copter, where you control an object up and down the screen, avoiding objects that are flying in from the side. This is going to be a really basic one for people who are new to Flash. If you're already quite competent, then you probably won't take too much from this, but you never know. It might be worth a look, even if that just means downloading the source file and having a flick through. We'll get started. I've just got a blank Flash file here and I'm going to save it. So save it to my desktop, just overwrite that one. And I'll upload that for you to have a look at later on. And I'm going to draw an object to avoid. So just take the rectangle tool, hold shift to make it a perfect square, and then I'm going to select it with the standard selection tool. Make sure it's a uniform size, 75 by 75 is not too bad. Maybe just a bit smaller, we'll go 60 by 60. So the width and the height are both 60. When you're happy with your object, you need to convert it to a movie clip. We'll do this at the top, we'll go modify, convert to symbol, or you could just hit F8. Make sure you've got your advanced menu open. If yours looks like this, just click to expand it there. Tick, name it first, just call it block. Tick export for ActionScript so we can use the name of this class in our code a little bit later on, and hit OK. So that is now a movie clip. We don't need to worry about naming it or anything. We're going to let the code handle most of that for us, if not all of it. If we run that at this moment in time, nothing spectacular happens. We've just got a black square. So we need to put some code somewhere to control this square. And to begin with, this is quite a basic way of doing it. We might come back and review this later on. We're just going to change the code inside this block. So you can either double click on it there to edit it in place, or find it in your library and double click on the icon. So I'm now inside the block symbol, and I'm going to add a new layer to do some scripting to. So new layer and call it script. Then I'm going to right click on the keyframe and go to actions to get the actions box. Now what I want to do is make this block move every frame, so I'm going to make it respond to a new frame. And to do that I'm going to add an event listener. If you've watched some of my videos you'll have done these millions of times by now. If you're new to them, I'm just going to talk you through it anyway. We need the type of event, which will be event.enter frame. So every time a frame is entered we're going to do something, and we just want to update, let's call it. Update this block, and we'll just put a comment above it. So update this block every frame, and here we explain what update means, and we use a function. So making a function which is a repeatable set of instructions, and it's going to be called update. So function space update, and then in brackets it's responding to an event, so it will take a piece of information that is an event. And we're into the body here of the function. And we just want the cube, the block, to move to the left. So we're going to manipulate the X property to move sideways. To do that we just type X, and then we can do equals X minus, let's say 10 pixels, so 10 pixels to the left. And at this point, if we test the file, Command and Enter or Control and Enter, you can see that the block moves. Once it's gone off the screen, it'll just keep going and we won't be able to see it, so we're going to have to limit that somehow. So I'll just put a comment here underneath. Let's limit the movement, limit the position to stay on screen. It won't be completely on screen, I want it to just slightly go off the left and then back onto the right. So what we'll do is say if and then in brackets ask about the x position. We'll say if x is less than, and we'll use the width of the object. We'll say minus width. So if it's gone off the left of the screen enough to be totally off the screen, so we'll just comment that, off the left of the screen, we want to move it to the right of the screen. And we can do that by getting the width of the stage. So we'll do x equals stage dot stage width, and we'll add the width of this block to it. So it's the width of the stage plus the width of the box, the block. And finally close the if. Let's try that one. Save it, try it out. So the block should come back to the right, and you can see it does. And it will do that continuously. So we've already got something we could avoid. It'd be very easy. We could just camp up here. It never touches. We'll work on that in a little bit. We also might want it to move at different speeds or slowly increase over time. So instead of using 10, we won't hard code a number. We'll have a variable called speed, and we'll make that up here at the top. So make a variable to control the speed. So make a variable, keyword var, call it speed, and say it's 10 to begin with. And we'll replace the 10 here with the word speed, and just replace that, move to the left. Make sure it works. Yep, that's fine. And what we could do is speed this up a little bit. So every frame we could add a little bit to this speed, and it'll increase. If I exaggerate it a bit, so let's accelerate. We'll make the speed bigger every frame. So speed equals speed plus, and let's say 1, just so you get the idea. This will rapidly increase the speed. You can see that it's getting very quick, very quick, very quick, very quickly. So let's tone that down. Let's maybe go 0.1 and see the effect. And you can see that it is getting faster and faster and faster. Possibly still too quick, but we can tinker with that later on. We could even replace this with acceleration and have that stored up at the top instead of hard coding a number again. So we've got a block that will move left. When it's gone off the left of the screen, it'll go back to the right. What we could also do is when it has gone off the screen, we can give it a random position up the screen so that it changes its position in the y-axis. So we'll just do that after we've moved it back to the right of the screen. We'll randomly position the block vertically. To do that, we access the y property, and we'll do y equals math.random to get a random number between 0 and 1, and we'll times that by stage.stage height. So that will put it somewhere along the height of the screen, hopefully. There we go. So you can see that it's coming back at a random height. Sometimes it's a bit low. It could also go a bit high. We could limit that later on, I suppose. You can see it's still accelerating, and if I try and dodge it with the mouse, it's still very easy. Oh, I just hit it, so it's obviously not that easy when it gets that quick. But now that the block's set up, we can reuse that. We don't have to worry about coding the same stuff over and over again. So if I go back to scene 1, maybe move my block over here so it's not on screen to begin with, I can either drag extra blocks from my library here, put them on, or with a block selected I can just hold the Alt key and drag, let go, and that will copy it. We've now got 4 blocks. Let's try that, and we should get 4 blocks that move across the screen. They'll reposition themselves, and you can imagine that's probably quite tricky, the speed they're moving. So we'll have to tinker with that a bit later. But now we need to be able to check if we've actually touched them. And we'll do that on the main stage here. There are millions of ways to do this. I'm going to do it by accessing everything that's on the screen, every frame, and seeing if the mouse is touching it to begin with. And then we'll apply an object to the mouse instead of using the mouse's position. So on the main timeline, I'm going to add a new layer, call it script. and go to the actions for that one. You might want to lock the layer as well. So we're now in the actions for the main timeline. And we want to do something similar to the block. We want to check something every frame, so we're going to repeat the process of adding an event listener. So we'll check for collisions every frame. And we'll add event listener, same type of event. And we'll just call this one main loop. So the main loop of the game, capital L to keep the camel case. Explain the main game loop here by again doing a function game loop, not main loop, not game loop. Again taking an event, and we're into it. So what we're going to do in here is go through everything that's on the screen, and if it's a block we'll say we'll ask Flash to see if we're touching it with the mouse. So we'll loop through everything on the screen. Now this isn't the most efficient way to do things in the long run. As you get more into Flash you'll figure out how to separate out little bits that you want to look at, but I'm going to try and keep this quite basic for now at least. So we'll loop through everything on screen. And to do that we're going to use a for loop. And in this for loop we're going to make a variable. I normally just stick with I for integer. So var I equals 0. Start at 0 because that's the first object on screen is stored at 0 position. Then we want to keep this loop going as long as I is less than the number of children on screen. We do that with num children. And then we have a semicolon again, and this is what we want to happen at the end of the for loop. We just want I to get 1 bigger. So we could do I equals I plus 1. A quicker way to do it is to just do I plus plus. Okay, so we're looping through all the children. Next we want to check to see if this object is a block. And we do that with an if, just like we had in the block object. We'll say if, just make sure my comments are spelled properly. If, open brackets, get child at, so we're getting a child at a certain number, and lucky for us our number is held in the variable I. If getChild at I is block, so we're asking it if it is a block, we want to do something, so we'll open that if. So this means the object is a block. And I just want to see if the mouse is touching it and do something. So we could just say if, open brackets, and we can use this again. Or we could save this object into a variable, which might be better off. We might be better off doing in the long run. So we could copy this and just underneath do var b equals as block. So we want to definitely be working with a block. We really don't need that. So we're going to make a variable called b, which will hold the object we're looking at, but we're going to tell it to be specifically a block. And then say if b dot, check it against the mouse by doing a hit test. So we're going to do hit test point, because the mouse is at a point in space. So if b dot hit test point, and then we just put the mouse coordinates, which we get by using mouse x with a capital X, comma, mouse y with a capital Y. Close the brackets for the hit test point, close the brackets for the if, and then open your curly brackets for the if. And all I want to do here is put a little message saying I've hit a block. So I'm going to use the word trace, in quotes, put hit. And hopefully if I try all of that and touch one of these blocks, you can see that we're getting a little message up here saying hit. So every frame I was touching a block, this hit message was being written to the text up there. So that seems to be working. And it was working against every block. Let's just throw something in there that isn't one of these blocks and make sure that that's not being picked up. So I'm going to quickly draw a big square there, make it a different colour, and then quickly convert it to a symbol. Doesn't need a name, we'll get rid of it in a bit. Just hit OK and try it again, and just make sure that we don't get any messages by touching the red block, and we don't. But if I go over a black block, I get the hit again. So we're only checking against the things we want to hit. Delete that now. Or we could reuse it as the thing that follows the mouse briefly. That might work. We'll put it back on and we will make this our object. So I'm going to edit it slightly by double clicking and scaling it down. So I could just select it and in the properties tone it down, maybe go 50 by 50 for this one. Notice it's not centered there, so I'm just going to undo that, and I'm going to use the free transform tool. Get into a corner so I can scale it, and I'm going to hold Shift so it maintains its ratio, but I'm also going to hold Alt so that it scales around the center point. And that'll do for now. I'm going to replace this object later with a graphic. So that is our player object for now. I'm going to go back to the main scene and give it a name. So click once to select it. In the Properties tab where it says Instance Name, we need to name it, and I'm going to call it Player with a lowercase p, because this is our main player. If we go back to our timeline, back to the script, we can now use Player to check against these blocks. So instead of checking the mouse, we can actually check an object. But before we do that, we need to make sure the object is following the mouse. So just before we loop through everything on screen, or even inside this, we could say if it's player, move the player, but I want the player to update first. So at the top of the main loop here, I'm going to do player dot y, so we're accessing the player's y position, equals mouse y. And that will, make the player object match the mouse y position. So it will only move vertically. Let's just try that. So you can see that the red cube follows the mouse, but only vertically. It doesn't move along side to side with us. And we can still hit the black box with the mouse pointer, but not with the actual red cube. We'll sort that next. I'm just going to slow those blocks down a little bit as well. So just randomly click on one of them, get to the script, and reduce this acceleration, maybe 0.02. Back to scene 1. And back into the actions. And we're going to update the hit test. So what I want to do is check the block against the player object. And this is actually easier than doing a hit test point. So we'll do b.hitTestObject this time. So we want to see if it's touching an object. And in the brackets, all we need is the name of the object, which is called player, not parent, as I was starting to type. So if b.hitTestObject player trace hit, save that and try it out. So player is now following the mouse, and if we touch any of the black blocks, we get lots of hit messages, which is okay. What we could also do is remove this event listener, so we only get one hit, which basically means game over. So I'm going to copy this line, and after I've traced hit, I'm going to paste it in and just change the word add to remove. Save that and try it again. We should only get one hit message now. The blocks will still move because they're controlled somewhere else. They're controlled inside their own timeline. We will work on that later on. But you can see the player no longer follows the mouse. We only get one hit message. That's because we've stopped checking things every frame. And I think as far as the first part of this tutorial goes, I'll leave it at that, just under the 20-minute mark. If you want to tinker around with that for a bit, maybe add different types of object that move in different ways or react differently when the player hits them, maybe they speed the player up or slow the game down, have a go with that. Otherwise, go straight on to the second part where we'll start to put some graphics in and maybe put a bit of random colouring in and so on. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time now adding some graphics to the game. This isn't a massive in-depth art tutorial, mostly because of time, but also because I'm not really an art teacher. I just use Flash, use the various tools and various other bits to do game content. I'm not a Picasso. So we'll use some of the basic drawing tools to make a silhouette of a helicopter. We'll also add some animation to the propellers, possibly blur them so they look a bit more effective. We'll start with basic shapes. So I'm just going to take my oval tool. In fact, probably best doing this straight into a new symbol. So let's go to the top, insert new symbol, call it helicopter, and just hit OK. We don't need to export this. Just make sure it was a movie clip. And in here, with the oval tool selected, I'm just going to make sure there's no stroke by clicking this button, and draw a basic hull shape for the helicopter. Try to keep it a sensible size, so quite small I think in this case. About that. Just going to select it with the normal selection tool and try and center it a bit. Okay. Just at this point I'll zoom in, so maybe 400%. Whoops, lost where we are. Undo that. There is a better way. If you click on the magnifying glass, you can draw a box around what you want to zoom in on. There we go. Don't think there's much scope for adding extra ovals, maybe one here just to curve onto the tail fin area. At this point I'm going to swap to the rectangle tool, and before I start drawing I'm going to make sure I've got curved corners on my rectangle. So with the rectangle tool selected, in the properties window just add, say, a 5 pixel curve to the corners of your rectangle so that you get this effect when you draw them. Instead of having sharp edges, we've got a curve. I'm just going to undo that one. First rectangle I draw will lead into the propeller base, so big rectangle there just to generate a silhouette, maybe another one, and actually undo that. I'm going to turn snapping off. You can see that my rectangle was snapping to other lines there. That's because that magnet was selected, so deselect that and you're free to draw any shape and size. So maybe one more on top to mount the propeller into, and there we go. We will eventually put a propeller on there. Add a few other rectangles just overlapping the circle to give some sort of silhouette to the helicopter. You can spend a lot more time on that than me. I want to get through this. Going to draw a big rectangle coming out the back for the tail of the helicopter. And finally one, well actually before I add the two little fins, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And at the end I'm going to bring these points closer together so it comes almost to a point. And to do that I'm going to swap to the subselection tool, click near the edge of the shape to see all the nodes, all the points, and let's maybe start by deleting this point, get rid of that one. And then these, I'll just drag select around them and bring them down using the arrow keys. I'm just holding the down arrow there to bring that down into more of a point. Not a full point, but just so they're closer together. And then I'm going to go back to my rectangle tool and add the fins here by just drawing a big rectangle there. Same process again with the subselection tool. I'm going to delete a node there at the top and bring these points in. Do the same at the bottom. So we're getting pointed fins. And you'll notice there's a bit of a kink in there. I'm going to swap back to the normal selection tool and turn my snapping back on. And if I hover near this corner, you'll see that I get a right-angled icon next to my mouse. If I click and hold at that point, I can grab that point and snap it to the fin, so we get a straight line there. Do the same at the bottom. So we've got a helicopter silhouette almost. We just need some landing gear and finally the propellers. Landing gear I'm going to do by using the line tool. So click the line tool and let's choose black as the colour. Maybe put the stroke up, or we can do that in a second after we've actually drawn the shape we want. So just going to click and drag somewhere here to make a line. Then swap back to my selection tool with V and curl the line just by hovering near it until we get the curved icon. Bend them a little bit, then I'm going to double click to select it and just drag this stroke slider till it looks a bit more believable. maybe 5, say 5 pixels, 4 pixels. I'm going to click that line. I don't need all of it. You notice there's some up here. We'll sort that in a bit. I'm just going to click that one. I'm going to copy it and right click, paste, drag it to where the other point would be, then come to the modify menu, transform and flip horizontal so it's going the other way. Get them both into position. Maybe nudge them up a little bit. You can see we've got a little overlap there, it's really not that important. Get rid of this bit. And finally, just draw a line almost connecting them, and a little bit of a kink at the end. There we go, I've got a helicopter silhouette there. Feel free to spend a lot of time making yours look nice. I really don't have that sort of time. I'm going to double click on each line just to get every bit of line and bash them around with the arrow keys till I'm happy enough. And then I'm going to select everything, and to make sure it's all one shape, I'm going to come to modify, change the shape and convert the lines to fills. So that will get rid of any lines I have, make them a solid shape instead. So the whole silhouette is one shape there. Next step, propellers. I'm going to do these on a separate layer. So I'm going to lock that layer, add a new one, take the oval tool, just press O, and draw a nice big circle by holding shift so we get a perfect circle. I still have a stroke, so I do want to use the line that's around my circle here. So we have a line and we have a fill. I'm going to double click to select them both, and I'm going to make this a symbol. So right click, convert to symbol. Let's call this blades and make sure the registration point is in the middle. We want this to rotate around the center. Hit OK. So we've got a symbol within our helicopter symbol. Double click on the blades so that you're working inside the blade symbol, which happens to be inside the helicopter symbol. Just adjust my view a little bit so we can see it. Maybe zoom in. No, too far. I'm going to take my line tool now and draw a nice big line in a different colour. Maybe reduce the stroke down to 1. Draw a nice big line, holding shift, that is bigger than the circle. So we've got a nice big red line off to the side. I'm going to click on that line and access my align window. You can go window, align, or it's normally hidden in your transform window. Select that and I'm going to center it horizontal and vertical. I'm then going to copy the line, copy it, right click again, paste it in place, and without deselecting it, I'm going to swap to the free transform tool, hover near the edge so I get the rotation tool, click and drag with the shift key held so that it go exactly 45 degrees and let go. Then going to double click the lines again to pick both of them, copy them, paste in place one more time and rotate 90 degrees this time. So we've split the propellers up into 8 chunks. Then with the standard selection tool I'm going to delete every other part of that circle and then double click the red lines, delete them to get rid. As a last little step we should probably put a circle right in the middle there. So let's get rid of the stroke, swap back to the oval tool and make a circle. I have to do this by numbers, so make the width something you can work with. Let's go 20 by 20 and then we want the position to be minus half of that, so minus 10, minus 10. It's dead center, so we've got a propeller shape we can work with. Again, spend time making it look nicer. At this point I'm going to right click on the keyframe and tell this to be a classic tween, so I'm going to animate this now. And I want mine to spin across a period of say 20 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 20 and insert a keyframe. I'm now going to select the span, or just click anywhere on the span between frames 1 and 20 so that I've got access to the properties of this tween. And all I want to do is change the rotation from auto to clockwise or counterclockwise, whichever way you want to go, and make sure it's set to 1 so it will rotate between those two keyframes. And you can see we've got a spin there, and because it's only 20 frames it happens quite quickly. That's pretty much it for the blades, so I'm going to go up one level back to the helicopter. And you've probably seen a bit of an issue now in that the propeller is sideways, which we don't want. We're going to the reason we did it in a movie clip is so we can now distort it to make sense. So I'm just going to position it where it should be, so it should come out that little top bit. Then I'm going to swap to the free transform tool and scale it down just in the Y direction so that we get a more believable perspective on the propellers. Just get them to position you're happy with. And what you could do at this point as well, with the propeller selected, go to your filters box and add a blur to it. You can change that, change the quality. You can even unlock them so you blur more in one direction and not so much in the Y, possibly. I'm actually not going to bother with the blur because I think for the point of this video it's not needed. So let's get rid of that. So we've just got the propeller. And I'm going to go to my library, get another instance of the blades and put them at the back of the helicopter and shrink them way down so that they can represent the propellers at the back. And these will animate in the game. So if we hop to scene 1 and drag a copy of the helicopter in and just test the video, you can see that the propellers spin. They're looking a bit odd there, and that's because it's using lines, and lines don't scale as well as fills. So what we can do is edit the blades, go back into the blades, and do what we did inside the helicopter where we picked everything, selected everything. Oops, that's the tween, sorry. Double click until you're working with shapes. Select it all, modify, shape, convert lines to fills. And we should notice a smoother animation that time. So that's not too bad. I think the helicopter's possibly a bit too big compared to the propellers. So could tinker with that. We could just go back into the helicopter, select the main bit on the locked layer. So select the main body of the helicopter and crunch it down. Maybe scale it that way. It's up to you. You do what you deem appropriate. It will also mean repositioning the propellers. So I'm going to have to unlock them, move that one back. I really don't want to get hung up on graphics, it's not the point of this video. You can spend plenty of time drawing it out. Let's see how that one looks. That's not too shabby, it'll do the job. So now instead of using that red rectangle, I'm going to use the helicopter. Just zoom out, I'm back on my main stage. Going to delete the red square that we've been using, put the helicopter where I want it to be, and give it the name player. So the code is already done for it. And now if we try it, you can see that the helicopter moves instead of the red box. Now my helicopter's got a massive hitbox at the moment. You can see by just clicking on it once that the big blue box is quite inefficient compared to the shape of the helicopter. That's just the way that the basic collision detection works in Flash. We could get hung up on doing it in lots of different ways, but for now we're just going to make the game using it as it is. We can change the shape of it, change the size of the helicopter if it's too big. You can always scale it down to make it smaller, make the game a bit easier by having a smaller object, and that's not too bad. The graphics are serving the purpose as well. What I did say I'd do is show you how to change colours using code. So what we'll do for starters, we'll look at one way of doing it to the helicopter, so just to the helicopter. So we'll go back into the helicopter, double click and add a layer for script. Right click, go to actions, and we're going to use a colour transform object. So use a colour, American spelling unfortunately, colour transform, it's actually written like that. Use a colour transform object to randomly tint the helicopter. So we're going to make a variable, we'll call it CT for colour transform, and it's going to be of type colour transform. So you can tell Flash to use a certain type by having a colon after your variable name. So it's going to be a colour transform. And it's imported it for me, I don't actually need that. Equals new colour transform. So type it again, hit enter, and put the brackets at the end. We could have put some values straight into this, but I'm just going to do them underneath. The colour transform has properties such as red offset, green offset, blue offset that let you manipulate the values for those particular colours. Now, we've drawn the helicopter in black, which means the red, the green and the blue are all set to 0. So we're going to add a random amount to each of them to generate a random colour. And we'll just comment that in. So generate a random colour by setting random offsets for red, green and blue. So we'll do CT dot, and because we've told it to be a colour transform, we get this prompt we can pick from this drop down. So we'll start with red offset and we'll make it equal math.random bracket bracket, that gives us a random number between 0 and 1. We can times that by the limit to a colour, which is 255. So we will have a random number between 0 and 255. I'm going to copy that line, paste it 2 times underneath, change red to blue, or green in this case, and finally to blue. Last little step, we want to apply the colour transform to this object. So we will access the transform property, transform object inside this helicopter, dot colour transform, and it's being picked for me there, and set it to equal CT, the colour transform that we've made. Now if I test the game, we get a randomly coloured helicopter, and if I test it again, we get a different coloured helicopter. If I try it again, we get another one. So it's just a quick way of manipulating the colour of an object. We'll look at different ways of doing it as well. But again, for this section, we'll get into the 20-minute mark. So I'm probably going to wrap up the tutorial in the next section where we'll add more graphics, we'll tint the whole thing in a different way, and maybe even add high scores and so on, and a game over. Okay? This final bit I'm going to try and go a bit quicker, so it might be in a bit of a rush. Do feel free to come to the website and ask any questions. I'm much more likely to answer your questions on my blog rather than on YouTube, so post away and help each other. First thing we're going to do is make this helicopter move in a bit more of a suitable way. So in the actual game that we're basically cloning here, you click the mouse to accelerate upwards, so we need to work towards that. So we'll do this all in script, go straight into the actions for our main timeline, and we're going to change the way the player moves. What we're going to have to add are 2 event listeners that work with mouse clicks. So underneath this add event listener, we're going to add 2 more. So add 2 event listeners for the mouse button. One's going to be the mouse being pressed down, so we'll do that first, and we're going to add these to the stage so that we can click anywhere. It's not always a good idea to add event listeners to the stage. You've got to be very careful to remove them, but we're okay in this instance. So we're going to add event listener to the stage. This is going to be a mouse event this time, so working with the mouse, dot, and we want mouse down. Oops. If I just type the dot, it should have prompted me, but it didn't. Never mind. Let's go mouse event dot, and in capitals mouse underscore down, and let's say clicked as the name for that function. Copy the whole thing, paste it underneath, change down to up, and clicked we'll say unclicked. We need functions to match these. I'm just going to, there's no reason to collapse that. Let's explain the mouse functions. So what we'll need first is a function called clicked, which in this case is responding to a mouse event instead of an event, so I use a lowercase n. That really doesn't matter, you could put anything there. And here we're going to have to remember that the mouse is held down, so we're going to need a variable. And we can do that up here. We'll make a variable. Var mouse is down, we'll call it. and we'll set that to false to begin with. So mouse isn't held at start. And then when you press the mouse button in, we'll say mouse is down equals true. So we're remembering that the mouse button is currently held down. We'll copy this function, paste it underneath, and change clicked to unclicked, change true to false. So when you release the mouse button, mouse is down is set to false. That's pretty much all there is to it there. We're going to make use of this true or false to move the player now. So instead of just moving towards the mouse, we'll basically get rid of that. Move the player based on the mouse button. So let's say if, really quickly, mouse is down, so that's asking if the mouse is down. That's saying if mouse is down is true. We could put that. Could say if mouse is down equals true, but you're asking if true equals true. Basically, you don't need that. Just do if mouse is down. So if mouse is down, open the brackets there, we'll move the player up. So we'll do player.y equals player.y plus 10, minus 10, sorry, to move up. And comment there, minus to move up. What this could be, we could make this shorter by just doing minus equals 10. So tell this value to be 10 less than it is. And we'll have an else player.y plus equals 10. Move down. So we'll move down the screen by adding 10. So if mouse is down, player's going to move up, else it's going to move down. Let's quickly try that, see if it works. So clicking, I move up, releasing, I move down. It's not very smooth though, so we'll have to work on that. And we can go off the screen now, which makes the game very easy. We just hide. We'll limit that later on. Or we'll die when we hit the bottom or the top. So then, let's change this a little bit so that the movement is smooth. We're going to have to remember the speed of the helicopter this time. So instead of affecting the helicopter's position, we'll affect its speed with the mouse. So we're going to make another variable, and we'll call it speed. We'll set that to 0 to begin with. No speed at the start. And then back in the main loop, if the mouse is down, instead of moving the player, we'll affect the speed. So let's say take something off the speed. So we can say speed equals speed minus, let's say 2. Or speed minus equals 2. And let's just comment that. Accelerate upwards. That's doing. Else we want to accelerate downwards. So speed plus equals 2. Finally, outside the if, we apply the speed to the player. So move the player based on the speed. Don't know why I'm putting a semicolon at the end of a comment. Do player.y plus equals speed. Let's try that one. Didn't work very well. Right, what have I done wrong? Let's just try and click faster. Maybe 2 is just too much. Yeah, you can see it does work. I was just... the 2's too high, so maybe let's put 0.5 and 0.5. Again, we could store this in a variable. Instead of using hard-coded numbers, we could make a variable or a constant up at the top. And that's too slow this time. We'd have a hard time working with that. Let's try 1. That was better. I think the blocks are just too big. So it's going to take some tweaking on your part, but I don't have time to be doing that in this video, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Work with that one for now. Yeah. And we could limit the speed. You can have a maximum speed, so you could say, for example, if speed is greater than 10, speed equals 10. So let's comment that. Limit the speed. And similarly, if speed is less than -10, speed equals -10. And we should probably do that before we move the player. So we'll limit the speed before we apply it to the player. And we could probably afford to go back to 2 then, because we're limiting it. That's much easier to do. Still hitting the blocks because they're too close together, but we can work on that. We could even delete a few. So, I don't know, delete the 2 middle ones. That's more like it. Yep, that's getting to be more like a game. Let's not get hung up on it. Get back into the code. And we should probably do something when we die. So instead of just stopping, let's work on making an explosion. And it's a good chance to look at a blend mode that people often overlook because most people don't quite understand how it works. A blend mode, if you've never used them at all, I'll just use the red square we had from before, if I still have it, just to show you. So this red square we're going to apply different blend modes to. By default, the blend mode is set to normal, and you can find the blend mode by going to the Properties tab while you've got a movie clip symbol selected. The blend mode is set to normal. If I change that to say darken, it will make any shapes underneath it, any colour, any content underneath it darker, but since it's over a black helicopter, it's you can't get darker than black. Change it to multiply. Again, black's not the best colour. This helicopter being black isn't the best way for showing a blend mode. Lighten. You can see that it's made the black lighter. The white is as light as it can get anyway, so it's staying white. Screen works. It's useful for things like clouds. If you watch the last video I put on YouTube, we do clouds using the screen blend mode. Basically, anything black becomes see-through. Anything else is added. And various other ones. Overlay, again, is useless on top of black. It basically applies the colours in a way that almost tints a shape into the colour you've got. What people don't use are alpha and erase, and it's because they just don't work by default. So I have to look at how we can do that. And we'll make an explosion using an erase blend mode. So we're going to need a new symbol for this. So let's insert new symbol and just call it boom. I'm going to export it for ActionScript because I'm going to use its name later on. Press OK, and here we are in our new movie clip. I'm going to need 2 symbols inside this one. These can be duplicates of each other, so I'm going to take the oval tool and draw a little circle to be used as an explosion. Center it with the align window. Bump. And convert it to a symbol. And we'll just call it explosion segment. This one you don't need to export. This is just purely for graphical reasons. We're not going to code this. Hit OK. Copy it. Insert a new layer and paste it in place so you've got the same symbol over itself. And what I'm going to do is make both of them into tweens. So I'm going to select both layers with shift held, right click, create classic tween, and let's say this explosion will go over 10 frames. Let's go to frame 10, select them both and insert keyframes or hit F6 to do it shorthand. And I'm going to move them on this frame, move them up maybe to about there. And the one at the top, this object is going to be our eraser. It's going to delete itself from the one below. So I'm going to lock the bottom layer, click the top one and make sure that its blending is set to erase. It won't do anything at the moment. You won't notice it. Do that on both keyframes. I probably should have done it before I tweened it. Make sure it's set to erase. And because this one's erasing from the first one, I want it to be offset at the start, so it needs to be below the other one. There it is. You can see it's invisible because it's set to erase, it's doing nothing effectively. But it's starting below the other one so that as it animates, it catches it up and it's basically deleting itself from the other one. So we'll get a shrinking circle as an explosion. We're going to need a little bit of code in this symbol later on, but just to show you how it works, that's what I've gone for. To make that erase blend mode work, the blend mode of this boom object has to be set to layer. That's why they don't work by default, because everything's set to normal. So we could do that by clicking on boom. If we drag boom in, drag an instance of boom onto our scene, we could click that, go to properties and change the blending to layer, and that will make the erase blend mode work. If I test that, and you can see that the second circle is deleting itself from the first one, and we're getting a sort of outward ripple, which would be quite effective as an explosion if we had lots of them. At the moment it's not doing anything near what I want from it, but at least the erase blend mode is working, and that's because it's set to layer. I'm not actually going to do it there though. I'm going to swap that back to normal. In fact, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to go back to it in the library, and I'm going to set the blend mode in code. So I'm going to add a new layer, call it script, and in there I'm going to get to the actions, and I'm going to set the blend mode by typing blend mode with a little b and a big N, blend mode equals, and then in quotes just type layer, all in lowercase, and that will set the blend mode of this symbol to layer, so that any symbols inside of it with the blend mode erase erase will work. Also goes for alpha. If you need to use the blend mode of alpha, the parent object has to have blend mode of layer. Hopefully that makes sense. You'll notice that it doesn't work inside the Flash editor. It's only when you make the SWF that you'll really notice it. What I want this boom to do when it gets to the end, I'm going to add a keyframe so we can put some code on this frame 10. Right click, go to the actions, and I want it to stop first of all, so don't repeat. And I also want it to delete itself from the world, so delete yourself from the world. And just to guard against any potential errors, we'll have an if statement here, just to make sure that it is actually a part of the world. So let's say if parent. So if it has a parent, it means it's inside another object. We want it to delete itself from its parent, so we're going to access its parent by typing movie clip. We could actually get away with using sprite here, but we've been working with movie clips so far. Then in brackets put parent, so we're accessing the parent and treating it as a movie clip. And then we want to do a dot remove child, so this gets rid of an object, and then in brackets this. So that line there says I want to remove this from its parent. And just to check, if we throw a few booms on, they should delete themselves after they've played, so it's going to be quite quick. Hopefully we don't get any errors. There we go. So they played once and then deleted themselves, which is exactly what I was after. So we can assume they're working. Right, let's go into the code on the main timeline and spawn a few of these booms when the player dies. So instead of tracing hit now, we will add a few booms to the player. So let's make an explosion. Just add a few extra lines at the bottom so we can keep the code visible. So we're going to make an explosion now. One on its own won't do, so we're going to use another for loop to do this a few times. So let's make another for loop, var, we'll go with exp, just for explosion, as 0. That might be a bit confusing, let's replace that, we'll call it counter. Counter is 0, and let's say we want maybe 12 explosion parts. We'll say counter less than 12, counter plus plus. So this for loop will happen 12 times. And we're going to spawn an instance of our boom object, which is why we exported it for ActionScript. We're going to make an instance of it and add it to the world. It will play through and then it'll delete itself eventually. So we'll start by make making a new boom. Make a new boom object. We'll do that into a variable, so we'll say var boom equals new boom with a capital B. We use capitals for object names, object types, sorry, and lowercase for actual variables or properties, which is why things like num children start with a lowercase, y is lowercase, x is lowercase when you use it. Hit test object is a function, and they also start lowercase. Made a new boom. Boom.x is going to match the player's x, so player.x. Boom.y equals player.y. Then we want to randomly rotate it, so randomly rotate boom. Boom.rotation equals math.random times 360. I'm going to go way over an hour with this video, sorry, but if it's worthwhile, you'll stick with it. If not, you'll have stopped listening long ago, so it really doesn't matter. That will give a random rotation. Let's add a random scale as well. Randomly scale it. This means affecting two properties. So we could do this in two lines. We could do boom.scalex equals, let's say, 0.2 plus math.random. And we could copy that and do the same to scale y. Or we could do them both at the same time by saying boom.scalex equals boom.scaley equals, and then 0.2 plus a random number between 0 and 1. So it will be at least 0.2 up to 1.2. Finally, add the boom to the world, which means add child. Instead of remove child that we've just used, we're going to add child, boom. I'm going to cross my fingers and my toes and hope it works. And let's hit something. And we died. Just to reinforce the fact that we're dead, we could hide the player. So outside of that for loop, let's hide the player. Player.visible equals false. And these booms need to be a bit bigger, so let's say 0.5 as a base. Ah, clicked off it. Let's hit this box, bang, we die. Not too bad, seemed to work. It's not the most visually impressive thing, you might just want to animate an explosion and bring that in, but it's always nice to know how things are done in code. Let's see, where are we? I said I was going to show you a different way of tinting things. I was going to tint the whole game, so I think for that to really have any effect we're going to need a bit more content. So maybe if we have a roof and a floor and some little form of background. So we can do that now if we just take the rectangle tool and draw a bounding box for the top that we're not going to let the player go out of. Maybe tone this colour down a little bit so it's still dark but not black. So it's a bit distinct from a helicopter. I'll go with a grey. And yeah, let's convert that to a symbol. Just call it boundary. We'll export it for ActionScript so we can check that the players hit it in the same way we do with the standard blocks. So press OK there. And I'm just going to hold Alt and drag another copy of it to the bottom. So I've got two boundaries. And back to the code. Sorry, I'm getting confusing. I wanted to keep this really simple, but it's always the way. Get ahead of myself. So we've got the code that handles blocks. Let's just collapse that down. If we select a chunk of code and click on one of these arrows, it crunches down. I'm going to have something similar, so I'll copy this and paste it underneath. And this time we'll check to see if the object is a boundary. So if getChildI is boundary, we want to do something very similar to what we did in here. So we'll just, actually probably best copying a bit of this. Yep, in fact all of it. want the player to respond in exactly the same way to a boundary as we do to a block. So we don't actually need to do something separate. We could just say if getChildAtI is a block or a boundary. So we can copy this. If getChildAtI is a block or two vertical lines, getChildAtI is boundary, we'll make it a block. That could just be movie clip because they're both based on movie clips. So let's treat it as a movie clip. We should die. So let's save it and try it. So if we hit the roof or the floor, boom, we die. Try it again. Let's just try and hit the roof. Yep, we die. And if we hit a block, we still die. That was easier than I was anticipating. So really it was just an update of those two lines instead of adding much extra. Good. Let's have maybe a background. So add a new layer, put this underneath everything. Really simple this one. We could randomly generate something, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I think I'll just quickly hide the other layer. Draw a rectangle and maybe have a series of them. So select it and just holding Alt, quickly drag it, snap it to itself and tone the colour down one tone of grey. Select them both, hold Alt and just keep doing it until we've covered the screen. These might be too dark, they might actually interfere, so we can just change that a little bit in a bit. Sorry, show the front, and yeah, they're a bit too dark, so we'll brighten them up a bit. Like that again. Quickly select all the darker grey ones, holding Shift, and we'll make them very light. And the other ones we could make even lighter than that by coming up to the colour palette, just dragging up to very near to white. Try that. That's not as disruptive. Spend some time on your background, make it look nice, do some weird shapes and so on. We're getting almost to the point where we have a game. What we'll do now, instead of tinting the helicopter in the way we have before, I'm just going to go into the helicopter and basically delete the script there. So I'll just can that layer, we don't need it. Come back to scene 1, and at the top of all the code in the actions here, right at the top, I'm going to tint the whole thing. So before we do anything, after we've imported those other things that we don't really need, we will need to import something for this. I'm going to tint the whole thing to a random colour. What we'll have to do is import a class called Color Flash. It's in fl.motion for no obvious reason, and it's .color spelled in the American way. We're going to use a colour object to tint the whole thing. So we'll make a new colour, we'll say var col of type colour equals new colour. Underneath it we'll set the tint of this colour now, so we'll do col dot, and there's a handy little function called set tint. Open the brackets, it wants two arguments. First one it wants is a colour, and the second is an amount. So between 0 and 1. 1 would fully tint everything to this colour, and anything in between 0 and 1 will slightly tint it. So we'll have a slight tint to everything. Col.setTint, and we'll just do math.random, keep typing random times, and then we'll use the full colour range. So we'll do OXFFFFFF, which is the hex for the full RGB. So 2 Fs for B, 2 Fs for G, and 2 Fs for R. We're getting a random number between 0 and that. So it could be any colour. And then finally a strength, which we can play around with. Let's try 0.5. And then we'll just set the colour transform of everything. So the object we're working in, we'll just access the transform dot colour transform, just as we did in the helicopter, and we'll set it to be col. Give that a go. And that's obviously gone with some sort of brown colour. Try it again. got a sort of pinky red, hazy purple. It's definitely working. Green, a disgusting green. Purple, and you get the idea. Point is, it works, and even the explosion's tinted. Everything that comes on screen is tinted to match, so it's a nice little effect. What else do we need to do? We've got no score. Way over an hour, sorry. But, oh well. The tint was possibly a bit too weak. Might turn it up. No, definitely a bad idea. Try turning it down. I can live with that. You play around with it. You might even want separate tints on separate objects. You could just go and stick them straight in the timeline of that object. Right, score. Let's just simply start with a score of 0. We'll make a variable here. Var score equals 0. Start with no score. And then every frame, every time we go to this main loop, we'll increase the score. But only, well, it'll only happen if we're not dead, because this loop stops happening when we die. So let's update the score. Just do score equals score plus 10. Or simply score plus equals 10. And we need somewhere to display this, don't we? So we'll come to the timeline, make sure we're working on the topmost layer so that the text is visible on top of everything. Click the text tool. I just want to know that I'm working within the stage, so maybe add this on a new layer in front of everything. Draw a box for the score. Oops, just type some placeholder in it for now, so it's got some text in. Position it. With it selected, go to the Properties tab and make sure it's set to be dynamic text. So instead of static text or input text, set it to be dynamic text and give it an instance name. So I'm going to call mine output, so we can access it from code. It's called output. Pick a font and so on, and you can embed the font to make sure that everyone who plays the game has the font. I'll just go with Century Gothic, and let's click embed. You can tick embed all or just pick specific bits. Mine's only going to have uppercase, lowercase, numerals and punctuation. It does add to the compile time, so my SWF might take a lot longer to generate, but oh well. Let's just show everything again. Position this somewhere suitable. It's not really visible there, is it? Let's go to the other side. Make it black. Going to align it to the right. Don't worry about what it says just yet, because we're going to affect it with code. It's all nicely lined up. And it's called output. Right, so we'll go to our main loop. After we've updated the score, we'll update the text field. So output.text equals, and then we'll have score in quotes to start with, and a colon. Close the quotes after a space, so you've got a space there, and do plus score. Try that now. You can see that the score is going up. Yep, all working. We have a game of sorts. It's now up to you to take it further, to give it a menu, to give it a game over screen possibly, to change the way it plays, and feel free to ask questions on the blog. I'll probably extend this tutorial in text with pictures and just give you the source code straight through the site, so do read along there. Make sure you show me what you've made. I'd be interested to see. Not many people are sharing stuff. I think you're a bit embarrassed. Don't worry about it. We all had to start somewhere. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you on the site, or see you next month.